Hello, everybody. Today we have a very special guest. Carol Hulsel will be interviewing Vela Mitchell-Thompson. Vela comes to us with an extensive background in travel technology, product marketing, e-commerce, sales, and even, as I just recently learned, has her own wine importing business. So today we're going to have a personal conversation with Vela and hear her story and her experience with racial injustice in the workplace. I would also like to remind everybody on the call today to put any questions or comments that you might have inside the chat so that we can pass them along to Carol. And thank you. I will pass it over to Carol and Vela now.
Great, Nicole. Thank you so much. Could you take the slide off the screen for us so we can get on? There we go. Awesome. Hello, Vela.
Hi, Carol. Good to see you. Hi, everybody.
You too. You too. Oh my goodness, it's been amazing to connect over social media the last few years and get reconnected after all those years ago serving on the Hbcu board together in the 90s, right?
Wow, you have to tell our age, Carol. Okay.
Sorry about that. But we've got a few years of experience and wisdom behind us, I think.
There you go. Yes, we do.
So Vela, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know you and I had the opportunity a few times over the past couple of weeks to connect and talk about what's going on in the world. And, I normally ask at the top, how are you? But I want to ask it a bit differently for you because, I know your husband is, he's in politics. Is he a state senator? Is that correct in Kentucky?
My husband is a Kentucky state senator, State Senator Reginald Thomas.
Yes. And so you have a unique perspective, I think, from that. And you guys, I know, were at a rally, a protest a week before last, I believe.
Yep.
And, so I want to ask this a little bit differently of you. I want to say, in the light of the deaths of more Black men and women like Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, how are you and Reginald doing?
We're doing great because we see this as an opportunity now to have a conversation. And that's so important. We've been encouraged because of all of the protests and the diversity of the protesters. Like in Kentucky, the protest that you saw us where we attended and I put on Facebook, it was representative of Lexington. Lexington is a city that has just over 10% Black. It's not a large Black population, but and the people who came out for the protest represented that. So it was 90% of whites, and I thought that was amazing. That so many of our white brothers and sisters are saying no more. Just no more. We can't continue this. They see this pattern of racism and they don't want it. We don't want it. And that's what makes us unique, I think, at this time in our lives, is that we're all in this together. And I love it. Yeah. So while the pandemic is on us and while we've had a situation where people are losing their lives, it is also a time, though, that God has said, okay, now, if I had to do this to wake you up, now you're awake. Let's do something about it. And so that's how I feel. So I feel it's really a time of opportunity for all of us.
Yeah. I've seen something going around about how people want 2020 to be done, and yet 2020 may be the year that we all needed to change, right? In some ways. And so we need to look at it differently. I had a chance, and you brought up, having conversations and who's showing up to these protests and that it feels different this time. And I think that one of the things that is key to progress is actually having personal conversations with people. And I know when I picked up the phone to call you and say how you are. And I wanted to ask you to be on here because we've known each other for so many years. And I always said I wanted, when I grew up, I'm just a slight bit younger than you, but you were way ahead of me in your career when I met you. And, you were already an executive, and I looked at you and I said, I want to be like Vila.
Oh, wow.
So
wow.
I was, because you were just such a leader, and such a strong leader, and such a great mentor, as well as someone who I had tremendous respect for how you approached everything. And so, when I thought about this, and I'm like, that's who I want to talk to about the subject, because I have so much respect for you and what you've done in your life. And, when I picked up the phone to call, you're welcome. But when I picked up the phone to call, I'm like, it's not something I do every day to ask my Black brothers and sisters, how are you? And really want to know how you're feeling about what's going on. And so, having these personal conversations sometimes can be a little nervous, especially the first time you do it. And the second time it gets a little easier, and the third time's a lot easier. And I think we need to get in the habit of having those conversations. I mean, what do you think about that, Vila?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember that day you called me. We had to pull ourselves off the phone. Do you recall that?
Yes, we did.
It's like, we really have to go because we have other things that we're doing. But, and that to me is what we need. What I really love about you, Carol, and about that particular day too, is we see each other on social media, yes, but we hadn't really spoken in depth like that for, 20 years perhaps.
Probably, yeah.
But what was really good is that we were able to share, and we were able to share deeply. And I'm saying that for a reason, because that's what I really feel missing. We talk peripherally around each other about things, but we don't really get into the depth. Like really what made you call me, which was good, is what I put on Facebook about my personal experience with racism and growing up in South Carolina, dealing with racism. And there are things that, as an African American, I really had never shared with my white friends, because I didn't want you all to think, oh, she's just using that, we want some, to get some sympathy. It's like, no, I'm not trying to get sympathy here. I'm saying this has been my experience. This has been hard. This has been really, really hard. It's your story. Yeah. And I had to share it. I had to keep it within. I didn't really share it before. So when I shared it with friends, and you weren't the only one who reached out to me, just sharing that, people had no idea what we go through as African Americans to get ourselves to the places where we are. I had one friend send me a note.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I had one friend send me a note saying, yeah, but you've done well, Vila. Yeah, but it's like, I had to come through a lot of things to get to that place. And so go ahead, Carol.
Lots of obstacles. So you told me the story of growing up in South Carolina, and you revealed a little bit of that on that Facebook post. But what was it like for you and your brother and your mom and dad? And with regard to that, tell me a little bit about South Carolina, and then tell us how your dad actually made the choice to start a shoe store.
Oh, wow. Anyway, it could be quite a long story, so I'm gonna try to do it in a short version. But my dad was an incredible man, and so was my mom. They were a really good team together. But growing up in South Carolina, when I obviously was segregated schools until I was in 5th grade, and then there was this freedom of choice is what it was called. Rather than forced integration, they had something called freedom of choice. And my dad said, well, next year, he said, maybe I'll have you go to the junior high school, Lake City Junior High School. And he says, and you're not going to be there with any Black kids because, we've got this freedom of choice thing, and and I was like, oh, Why? I don't want to leave my friends. But anyway, what happened, I didn't go in 6th grade, but in 7th grade, my dad sent me and my brother my brother went to Lake City High School, and I went to Lake City Junior High School. And as you can imagine, there weren't any black kids in my class. Mm-hmm. And so, and I was like, Daddy, why are we going? And he says, because they have better books. And, you know, he says, and I know you're smart enough and you can learn. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I went to school there. And that was my first time seeing discrimination was in my history class. I took my first exam, and mind you, now I was sitting in the back of the class because that's where Mrs. Brown, who was my teacher, would allow me to sit. I could not sit up front. I couldn't sit. She made me sit in the back, I guess, so she could pretend that I wasn't there or something. But anyway, I made 100 on the exam, and she said to me, "You must have copied. There is no way you could make 100. Who am I copying off of? I'm sitting in the back of the class, barely near anyone, right? So anyway, to show you what an amazing father I had, my dad would pick me up from school, and so I got in the car, and the first thing I did was tell him the story that she said that I copied. And he says, well, in the morning we're going early. He says, and I'm going to the principal. And he apparently called the principal and made appointment to see him that next morning. He took me in. He had already told the principal that he wanted my teacher there. And he made her give me the exam again, right there in the principal's office. And he also told her, and I want her sitting in a front seat so that she can look at you anytime she's taking an exam, so that you will never accuse her of copying again. Wow. Just because she has the ability to learn, you will never make her feel like she doesn't. Mm-hmm. So I tell people why I've gotten to where I am is because of the strength of character of my parents, who made me always know it was okay. But my mom would always say to me, Bila, say yes, ma'am. Don't sass anybody because they'll hurt you, and so it was all of those things that I had growing up that I had to deal with that other kids in my class didn't have to deal with. And then I think I shared with you, and I know I shared on that post that my brother, my dad said, you all are going to be in the band, you're going to do whatever. He says, you're not just going to that school, you're going to participate. So I was in the, we had a middle school band, and I was in the band. My brother played football, and he was a really good football player. And they had an athletic banquet at the end of the season. And so my brother and his girlfriend went to the banquet. My brother won the Unsung Hero Trophy. Mm. There was a white kid who was really angry that my brother was one playing football and one won he won a trophy. And he shot my brother in the leg and said, and I'm going to be very graphic here, people. He said, nigger, you will never play again. And he was right. My brother never played football again. It really destroyed my brother. It was just so devastating for him to have, and the bullet was never removed from his leg. So he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And he passed away in 2015. And it was just, he never really got himself back to the happy guy he was always. I mean, he was still fun, but that's the kind of thing we grew up with. And, and I'm just giving you part of my story. My dad also started a shoe store. My dad started his own shoe store when I was in 4th or 5th grade when he decided to start a shoe store. And the reason why he started the shoe store was because he had gone shopping with my mom. My mom had large feet, and she couldn't, she couldn't try on the shoes because in the shoe stores that were owned by whites, they wouldn't let her try on the shoes because the white women, they said, would not try on the shoes after black women. So my dad found that just so upsetting. He went around back of a few of the stores in town because he knew where they threw their trash out, their boxes, things like that. And he got the names of the shoe distributors And he started calling them, and finally he found one that said, yeah, he would sell shoes to my dad. And so my dad set up a meeting, went, and this guy was in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, so I don't know if there's anyone on who's from North Carolina and who's from Rocky Mount. And the name of the distributor, I remember him so well because my dad took us up there, was B. Klitschner and Sons. And so my dad went up to see Mr. B. Klitschner, whatever, and he said to my dad, yeah, I'll sell you the shoes. My dad brought back shoes in his station wagon, and then my dad had to find a store. Nobody would rent him a store in downtown because he was black. So he found a store we had a black community where there was stores and funeral homes, things like that in our hometown. And so my dad, the funeral home director, had a little building next door to the funeral home. I mean, really tiny. And Daddy rented that building. I think it may have had one window in it. It was just so small. And the thing that I remember the most is when he announced that he was opening his store, and he, you know, these women, he told the women, you'll be able to try on shoes. He had a line to get in his store.
I bet.
On the day that he opened. And I remember that as a kid. And he was really, my parents became very successful with their shoe store. And after that first store, they went to a larger store. They went, my dad bought a store downtown because nobody would rent him one. So he paid cash for it and bought one after he became so successful. Then he opened a second store in another town, and then he opened a third store in a third town. So that's what I saw, and I know that you know, economic development is really one of the things that we need in our community, and we need people who are driven, who believe, and you know. So I come from an entrepreneurial background, and I come from a background of people who think, you know, you can just keep moving forward. Even after my brother was shot, my dad didn't let that stop him. And that's just one thing. I think I may have mentioned also, I mean, along the way, I don't want to say it was really easy, because we had things like a cross burned in our front yard because they didn't want my dad to have a shoe store. They told him he could open a candy store, an ice cream store, but not a shoe store because that would compete with the whites in town. And when he said, no, I'm not closing my store, we, you know, all the windows were broken out of our house. I mean, that's the thing, you know.
That's
and then
crazy. And that's, and you know, that's in your, that is something that is, you know, in your fabric. It is your story. It is it has made you part of who you are. And it's not, you know, it's something that I can only imagine the impact that that's had on you, with your future, right? Back then, looking at your future and choices that you made and things that are running through your head at certain times. And, you know, and so I just honor you, and your dad sounds like an amazing man, and your mom, I wish I could have met them. But, you know, I just feel for you and and what your brother went through, and that's your experience and it's your story. And, you know, it's really the experience and story of so many people. Right. And I think, we don't oftentimes as white privileged people take the time to listen and to hear and to learn and to understand, psychologically, you know, how that could have impacted you or anyone else that's had to experience things like that. And we can't associate with it. You know, I think when I talked to you earlier in the week, I said the only time we had this period of time where our family had a death threat and we had to run for a couple months. And it was not too long ago. And I just remember that feeling of constantly like looking around and trying to figure out if I was going to be safe or if something was going to happen. And I had a conversation this week with someone, Fred Bean as well. And he said to me, he goes, you know, I said, that's the only thing that I can equate to how, you know, you as a Black man must feel when you drive down your street or, walk into your apartment. Because, I mean, so many places that you would think you'd be safe and you're not. I mean, Botham was killed in his apartment, right? So, I mean,
Yes.
and so was Brianna, right? In her home. So and he said, yes, that's similar feeling, that feeling of wondering when the shoe's going to drop. Is something going to happen now? Is something going to happen in the next minute? Is a similar feeling that we have to deal with. And moving it over kind of, Vila, to the workplace. I mean, you've had a tremendously successful career. You've started 2 companies, successful companies. You were a top executive for several different travel companies, as well as engineering and just all kinds of things. And there were a couple of stories that you told me about the workplace. And one I'm going to touch on, and I don't want to get too deep into, but one was a situation where there were other people, white people that you worked with, and you were in the same level as them in an organization, and you didn't get the same package that they did when the company was sold, and it was a significant amount of money. And they knew it, and you didn't, and nobody came to your side and stood up and said, Vila, let me tell you what's going on. And there was someone else who came in to do an audit from outside the company who came to you and said, Vila, this is happening. You need to know about this, and you need to get this done differently. And I just
that
say
is
to you,
exactly what happened, Carol. It's just,
yeah.
It's
so those
one of the
people were not allies to you.
Yes. I mean, and these are people I knew for so long and I worked with for like 11 years. And I'm going, oh my God, I can't believe I've worked with these people for this long. And they would not tell me, hey, Vila, you probably want to know that, we're getting this. And do you have it too? Instead it was like, no, if I tell her, means I'm going to get less or something. I'm not even sure what they thought. And when this person came in and told me, she says, I think this is something you need to know. And she says, they're all getting this and you're not. And she said, and I want to know, she says, why aren't you? I said, I didn't know anything about it. It's like they had this secret and they were told not to tell me. It was the weirdest thing. And I just, I couldn't work with any of them any longer. I just couldn't. Because at that point I realized, wow, as hard as I worked, staying away from my family, traveling all over the world for this company, doing everything I could to make it successful. And my contribution was thought of as something that could be excused because if we give it to Vila, we'll make her wealthy. And we don't want to make her wealthy because we want her to continue to work. It's like the rest of us can maybe, we'll get the money and we can quit or go start our own businesses or do whatever. But we want Vila to make sure she's still working here. And then when I wouldn't do it, then it was like, oh, well, we're going to say that you resigned. Mm-hmm. We're not going to say that we did something like this. We're going to say you resigned.
Right. And what's interesting is after that, of course you were able to work some things out in the end, but you had to fight for it. But after that, then there was another company that came along, a couple of companies that came along, and I'll say their names. Hbcu was one of them because you had negotiated huge contracts with Rich and the guys at Hbcu. And they hired you right away. And they were fabulous to me. They gave you so you started your own business, right? And they hired you in a long-term contract. And they were your ally, yeah? They were my allies, Barney and Rich. I mean, they were the best. They took care of me. They gave me my first contract.
and they, I ended up hiring several people to work with my company. We ended up working with Hbcu, helping them open their operations in China. So I have, but the thing is, Hbcu has never really gotten credit for doing such a good thing. And so I wanted to take this time today to give them credit for doing such a good thing, because I know they get beat up a lot.
Well, they do, by hoteliers especially, right?
Exactly. So I'm saying,
but there were some really, yeah.
I think that, from Greg Fleestack, when they first started the company, to Rich Barton, Byron, there were those guys, Russ Satch, Russ and I worked together at Northwest. I want those guys back. They had good hearts. They were, they knew how to talk to me. I knew how to talk to them. We were friends, meaning we could talk to each other. That's why when I think Barney got in a little trouble when he was at Uber, I'm like, what? How can that be? Barney had that kind of relationship with me where we could talk to each other. So, what I ask all of you is, just talk to each other. It's really, if you can tell if you're the white person in the room, you need to be open and honest with the black person in the room, but the black person in the room needs to be open and honest with you too. When it hurts, you need to say it hurts.
Yeah. And, I think, we have to recognize and be sensitive to what's going on in the world around us and have those conversations. And, so many of us were raised, I know I was, by my parents. We don't talk about race and we don't talk about religion. We don't talk about politics. And I'm like, wait a minute, all three kind of need to be talked about, right? I mean, they're pretty important things in our lives, right? And so, I think that I think that may be part of why having some of these conversations is tough. But if you take that first step to have a personal conversation with someone who's different than you, with a different color skin, with a different background, that only educates you, and you learn to appreciate those differences. And that's one of the reasons I love the travel industry, is because I feel it has opened my mind to other ways of doing things that, as a girl who also grew up, a white girl grown up mostly in the South, would have never had the opportunity to experience and learn to appreciate. And the only way we can understand where someone is coming from and what their perspective is in life is to hear their story, and to open the door for them to tell you how they're really doing, and not just, how are you? Fine. Oh, good. I'm fine too. Not that, having that deeper level conversation of, no, how are you really? And, my husband works for a very big organization who I think is, and both of them actually worked there when he got shot and died. And so their CEO has been very, very engaged in this initiative of racial equality and Black Lives Matter, and all the different activism that goes along with it. His company has been very involved, and that he came right out when these most recent murders happened. He came out and he said, okay, all of us need to have a conversation with our Black colleagues, and we need to be having it regularly, and we need to ask them how they are. And I heard Scott on a leadership call the other day, and there was one of their leaders who said, I waited 24 hours to call one of my employees, and I want to publicly apologize for that, because I should have called right away to find out how they were. And don't wait, have the conversation, and care and listen. Don't spit out your own stuff, just listen. And I think that that's so important, in the workplace. So I want to give one more example, and then I would love for you to then tell us how we can be allies as white colleagues. What are some specific examples of things that we can do? But there was another story you told me that was early in your travel career that absolutely shocked me. and there was a man that you worked for who asked you to write a report, and you hadn't been in the travel industry. You were shifting into. They had recruited you because they had some diversity initiatives going on, and you were brilliant, and they met you and they recruited you and brought you in. And when you gave him that report, and he read through it, what was his conversation with you?
I'm glad you remembered that. That's something I don't want anyone else to ever experience. He said to me, I wrote a report. I'd only been there, I don't know, maybe a couple of months at that time. And I'd come from the defense industry because I used to, and one of the things I didn't mention, and I think you mentioned a little bit about it, but I used to sell missiles. I worked for Hughes Aircraft Company. And so when I was recruited from Hughes to come and work in the airline industry. And I was in sales. And my boss, when I wrote this report, because I felt like, okay, we have too many people in this department who are not really doing anything. We really do need to reduce, and the company was in bankruptcy. So we really needed to do some reductions, and we need to do them smartly. And so I wrote a report saying, you know, how are we going to do this? Mind you, now at that point, I already had 2 master's degrees, one of which was an MBA. I'd also been in school, gotten a certificate in financial management at Wharton. And I went to Pepperdine for my MBA. I'm not a slouch here, okay? So I write this report, and he says to me, who wrote this for you? And I go, what? And he says, who wrote this for you? And I said, I wrote it. He says, well, I've never had a Black person write this well before.
Oh.
It was all I could do to stay in the room and be calm.
Oh,
you know,
I don't know how you did that. I don't know how you did that.
I'm gonna have to this guy is my boss. Stupid as he is, he's still my boss. And I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do about this. But I cannot let it stand like this. But this is not the time to have the argument. The time is to say to him, okay, well, now you've met somebody. And I leave the room. I go to my desk, and as I'm thinking, what's going to be my strategy? And I know that, my assistant at the time, she was very talkative, and, I knew she would talk to other secretaries or assistants. At the time they were called secretaries, but in the building rather. And so I decided that moment that I was not going to work there under those conditions any longer. And so but I wanted to make sure that when I wrote this letter of resignation, that the people who needed to know beyond my boss would know. So I knew my assistant would tell, the guy who was my boss's boss. She would tell his assistant, and his assistant would probably tell him. And it is exactly what happened. And so then I wrote the letter. I had my assistant type it. Of course, within an hour of my writing the letter, my boss's boss is calling me into his office and wanting to know why am I planning to leave. They've spent all this money recruiting me and everything else. And I tell him the story, and I said, I came here with my dignity, and I'm going to leave with my dignity. That I'm not broke, and I'm not I don't have to work here. I work here because I want to work here. So I'm not going to tolerate somebody talking to me like I'm an idiot. And you ended up
getting, I was just going to say, you ended up getting a promotion and a relo out of that, and how you ended up in Atlanta, right?
Exactly. Ended up getting moved away from that guy's department. His boss said, what do we need to do to keep you? And I told him, and they moved me out of his department, and I ended up getting that out of his department. I got with the guy who was on the board of the company that I eventually got to in Atlanta, and it just worked out for my career completely that I stood up to him and not allow that to happen to me.
Which I know is not necessarily everybody's story, right? Sometimes when you stand up, it doesn't go as well. But or you get put on a you know, to push to the side from leadership opportunities.
A bad person's list. I'm not suggesting that that you be adversarial so much, but I mean, you have to have some integrity for yourself, and I think that, you know, not having an argument with my boss, I didn't do that. I just decided I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. And so when you have to be strategic. So I was strategic about the way I handled it. And his boss let him know that wasn't acceptable. Well, apparently I wasn't the only one having difficulty with him. There was another woman in the company who he was having, you know, making sexual comments to her. And he ended up losing his job eventually. And not being hired in the industry at all anymore. So, you know, sometimes you have to speak up.
Absolutely. And one way we can be allies is by speaking up for each other, right? Or our Black colleagues, we call it out. Like, we need to call it out when we see it, and we shouldn't keep our mouth shut. And I think it's hard. It's easier said than done. But, you know, one of the ways that we can come alongside is by calling a spade, basically, you know, and we can see that those kinds of things are happening, and many times we don't say anything.
And Carol, if you know there's a position or something that one of your Black colleagues could, you know, maybe you know they qualify for it, you know, why not say to them, hey, you should consider this position, you know, do you need
recommend
my support for it? Yes, recommend it.
Yes, recommend, you know, put that person's name forward, you know, and network, connect people to the right people, right? And say, this person is brilliant. This person is so talented. You know, you need to get to know this person, because through networking, so much is how we get our next opportunity, right?
Yeah. There was a young man who reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he wanted me to know that, you know, he's sorry. He apologizes for, you know, his ancestors and slavery and everything. I told him, I said, listen, you didn't create the system. There's no need for you to apologize to me. What I want you to do, though, as an ally to your colleagues in the future, if there is someone who comes in and they don't know as much as you do, because, you know, they didn't go to the same schools perhaps that you did. So they didn't learn it in the same way that you did. Why don't you try and help them? That, I think, is so much more important, because once you help them and they learn it, then they can help someone else to learn it also.
Yeah. And we need to, I was just going to say, we need to be intentional about that. You know, I think in our networks and when we, you know, you and I have been in the industry for a long time, and so we can mentor people. And I think we need to be conscious about, you know, who do we mentor? And, you know, one of the questions that we had from the audience is, how can we best address the lack of diversity in the leadership teams of the hospitality industry? You know, and I would say one of those ways is by being intentional about who we mentor, you know, who we as leaders have in our circle to bring to the next level in their career, and then to recommend, and hopefully they'll go beyond what we've done, right? But what are some other practical ways that we can be about making change in the travel industry and the C-level?
Well, you have to recruit. I mean, just recently, one of my friends, a former neighbor, became the CEO of UPS. She was with Home Depot before, but and she was on the board of UPS, and they hired her. This is not an African-American woman. This is a white woman. But the point is, it's the same thing applies. If you want to bring in people into the hospitality industry, bring them from other industries where if they know business, they know business, and they can learn, you know, hospitality just like they learned anything else. So sometimes you have to reach to other industries and bring people in. so that they will bring other people in, because you have to recruit. You can go to one of the things that I really would love for you all to do is to start visiting HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, when you're doing your recruitment. Start bringing in, and I that was one of the things that I always had kind of a concern about with the airline industry, with the hotel industry. Why weren't you going to these HBCUs and recruiting? And when you're recruiting people, why not? Why not set up, like with a lot of the call centers that we take offshore sometimes. There's no reason to do that. You can set up call centers at these HBCUs in these small towns in North Carolina and South Carolina and places like that, where these people would get training that you can provide for them, and the cost of that would be either minimal, for you all, or nothing at all, just for them to get that training. So there are lots of things that you can do to change the narrative. Every African Americans, we want jobs, and we want the same things you want. We want to have a nice place for our family to live. We want our kids to go to good schools. We want a healthy environment. We want health care. We want the same things. Our blood is red, just like yours. We're not we're not trying to take anything from anybody. We don't want handouts. That's not what we're about. All we're saying is, give us a leg up. Show us how, okay, teach us the same math that you teach your children. That's how if you teach us that, then we'll use it effectively to win also. That's all. And so what I say to my colleagues out here in hospitality land and in travel, go find people, find African Americans, also come to our churches on Sunday. When the pandemic is over and we can open the doors again, we go to your churches. I mean, I belong to a United Methodist Church and in Atlanta, and I think we have 2 or 3 white members. But when I was in Minneapolis, when I lived there, my church was Wesley United Methodist Church, and it was primarily a white congregation. And I learned from them, and they learned from me. And that's what we have to do. We have to start coming into each other's homes. We have to have dinner together, because that's how we're going to really learn about each other. I have a neighbor in Atlanta, and I adore Mickey, because that's how we've learned about each other. She says, I've taught her so much, and she's taught me so much. And she grew up in the South, and we are like this, because we talk to each other. And that's why I just think that's what we have to do. We have to talk, and we don't talk at each other. We don't worry about if she says something, that is offensive. I tell her, I call her out on it. If I say something that's offensive, she calls me out on it. That you have to treat each other just as you would any other friend. We're no different.
I was just going to say, there's another question, and this kind of leads. No, you're good. This leads me to another question from the audience. They said, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want your perspective on this, Vila. It says, as a white person, what is the best way to open a conversation with an African American, a Black person? And that was, I just want to say to you, that was a question that was on a webinar that I watched today with U.S. Travel, and they said, do you prefer African American or Black person? And every one of the panelists, who were all Black, said we prefer Black because, and one of them said, hey, I lived outside of the United States most of my life, and we were not African American because we're not all from Africa. We're Black.
Black is a more universal term, but just so you're aware, we use it interchangeably in our community, so you can too. You can call us either. We're not going to be upset if you call us African American or if you call us Black. Personally,
I think for a while people I think for a while that a lot of white people thought we had to say African American, that we couldn't say Black. And, you know, I think that Black Lives Matter has actually helped with us, you know, being able to actually use the term that is more universal. And so I just wanted to bring that up. That wasn't the question, but
I understand. I mean, it's just, I mean, like I said, we use them interchangeably.
Yep.
And it's, you know, not every Black person is from Africa. So,
right.
you know, Americans,
Yep.
you know, our ancestral Black Americans generally came from Africa, but, you know, there could be,
Yep.
you know, Afro-Brazilians too, or something. But,
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, then the
Caribbean.
Brazilians who live in the U.S. So,
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Black is probably a more universal term.
Yeah. So the question was, but what's the best way to open a conversation about race, and what I, as a white person, can do to make sure that I don't seem privileged, even though that isn't how I feel. Like I, you know, you don't want to enter the conversation and act like you're doing it from a place of privilege, right? And so I would just say, as a white person, as I said earlier, it's been hard for me to learn to have those conversations. But even on our team, you know, we had one of our Black team members on our weekly happy hour call, and it was simply saying, how are you really? How is this affecting you? How are you feeling? Let us learn your perspective about what's going on in the world, and approaching it from a humble place of compassion and empathy. But what do you think, Vila, about how, you know, what's practical advice you can give people to start the conversation?
Here's the thing. I think Black people, African Americans, all we want is authenticity. If you come at us authentically, we know it and we appreciate it. That may mean that you may come at us with a privileged conversation and not even know it. But I think what is incumbent upon us is to tell you when it's happening, because you can't fix something that you don't know is a problem. And when you've been conditioned all your life that this is who you are, it's pretty hard to know when you're coming at us from your privileged background and not really understand that you're making a statement that says, wow, I didn't realize I was making a statement that came from my privileged background. And so someone would have to tell you that, because, so I'm saying, I would rather you come at me authentically. Now, I don't want you to come at me and, oh, I'm sorry, you know, if that's not who you are. If who you are is somebody who feels genuinely that you want this to change and you want to be a part of the change, then I will know that. But if you're just patronizing me, I will know that too. And I think you're better off. Yeah.
I was just gonna, say something to that too, Vila, because I think we got to take off our offended pants and put on our no offense pants and say, I'm not going to get defensive. Like, as I think, as you know, a white person, I need to prepare myself that I might say something that's offensive and not even realize it. And so I'm here to learn. I'm here to speak, to understand, and I'm here to educate myself. And if I am saying something wrong, I want you to tell me. We need to have that approach and not get defensive and offended. So it's like,
Carol, that is perfect. That is a perfect way to start the conversation, to say, listen, I want to have an open and authentic conversation with you. And listen, I may say something that you find offensive. And if I do, please tell me, stop me. And then you may say something that I find offensive, and I'm going to tell you that too. So I know that you got that list of that I found of 75 things that white people can do, and one of the things on that list talks about, and it's one of the, you can click through to a link, and it talks about a young white guy whose father was KKK, and he was actually a part of the KKK, and he was a David Duke supporter a whole bit. And he went to college. And when he went to college, he ended up having Jewish friends, African-American friends, Asian friends, and they had this group and they started talking. And he started to understand, wow, that he had been conditioned all those years, all his life, and that the things that he had been taught that he thought were, particular to his white group, really, they weren't. And so I bring that up to all of you to say, that's what you need to do. You need to find yourselves a good group of folks that you can actually sit down and have conversations with, who will be honest with you, who will tell you, who will let you in, and you let them in too. That's the other piece. Yeah. To be an ally, you've got to let them in. You've got to share. If my friends had told me when we were in that company working together, if they had said, hey, Vila, all you need to do is do this, that would have taken them 5 minutes. Or if you know someone is being underpaid, or you think they might be, you need to say, hey, here's the range.
Say something.
And you can save your company a lot of agony, because then that person isn't going off and suing your company for discrimination, because your company needs to know, hey, you're wrong. You really shouldn't do that. Right. They have to pay the same bills I have to pay, and they're doing the same job I'm doing. Don't pay them less,
Exactly. Exactly.
So I think it's really important that you be a part of the change, because we don't know if you don't tell us. So you need to tell us what's going on, okay?
Yeah. Yes. So I know, I just want to remind everyone that this recording will be available on our website, and we will send a link out as well, an email later this week. We also have worked with Vila to put together a list of just resources that will be available as well. And some are educational resources about, we were talking about how could we support the quest for equality and justice, like what are things that we could do. So we've got a list of some places that you can donate, and some of those are to educational institutions and to scholarship funds and that type of thing, because I know that you, Vila, believe that a huge part of it is and I believe this is absolutely true, system-wide, that part of it is giving people equal opportunity to have education and to have opportunity and to have a seat at the table, right? And for them to be, prepared to go out and seek those opportunities. So tell us a little bit about the list that you sent us for places that we might be able to financially support the efforts.
Well, I gave you community colleges, a community college, I should say, here in Lexington, Kentucky. It's called BCTC. It's a community technical college, and I really think that they are doing good work at really educating kids from the community, Black kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids. And they have a scholarship fund. It doesn't cost a lot to go to that college, but they need to do outreach. And then I also gave you Claflin University in South Carolina. I gave you a link there, and I gave you also a link where the college president is talking about what they're doing for equal justice. Because I really know that these schools are doing a lot of good work in science and technology, and they're preparing the young people that you want in your organizations. They're preparing them so that when they get there, when they're working with you, you don't have to spend extra money teaching them, because they're going to be well trained when they get there. Okay. And that's why I want my white brothers and sisters to help to realize that your contributions need to go beyond just in your community. They need to go outside your community, because in order for all of us to do well together, we have to help each other. So definitely, and the third university I added, and I want to do about Howard University. I added Howard University because Howard has medical school, dental school, nursing school, all the, we need health care. I also, and then finally I added OHub, which is an opportunity hub, and they are just training African American kids to code, and we need that. And last summer, for instance, Amazon, Apple, a number of large companies hired these kids to work for them during the summer. And so I just want you all to really take a look at that list and make a contribution. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Vila, we have like 2 more minutes. So I want to give you an opportunity. I know it's hard to narrow it down to one thing, but I'm going to ask you to, which is tough. But if there's one thing that white people could do to become an ally to our Black brothers and sisters, what should we do?
Actually, I know I thought about this. I really want you to share and be honest. I want you to let us know. And when I say share and be honest, you have to share information with us. And you have to be honest with us. You have to be honest with us when we work with you about our capability. If we need to improve something, tell us. What do we need to do to improve? I had great bosses at Honeywell and Hughes and colleagues who helped me, who really, really helped me. I think of Jimmy Clark right now, who's sat in the cube next to me at Honeywell. And Jim and I was selling guidance and navigation systems for commercial and military aircraft, and so was he. And Jim was a pilot, and I wasn't. And Jim said, "You need to go. You need to go to pilot. To flying school." I'm like, "Are you kidding?" He says, "No. If you go to flying school, you learn all of this." So what did I do? I went to flight school.
It's amazing.
And then any questions I asked Jim about anything, Jim was a fighter pilot. He would tell me the answer. Jim is white. He is one of my 30-plus year friends. Jim is white, I should say. And Jim shared. He shared with me how much money he was making. So I could make the same amount. He shared. Yeah. When he went to Hughes, I went to Hughes. That's how close we were and are. And his son, and this was when I was in California, his son went to Georgia Tech so that he could be near his Auntie Vila. So my point is share and be honest and be a gem, okay? Just be a gem.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vila. I so appreciate you, and can't wait till when this is all over and I can give you a hug face-to-face.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much.